"What can I do for you, my dwarfs?" he said. "Keely at your service," said the one, and Feely added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners at this time. "Dwalin and Balin here already, I see," said Keely. "Let us join the throng." "Throng?" thought Mr. Baggins. "I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He had only just had a sip in the corner while the four dwarfs sat around the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with the goblins and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous. Just when, ding-dong-a-ling-dang, his bell rang again as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Someone at the door," he said, blinking. "Some four, I should say by the sound," said Feely. "Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance." The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened and what was going to happen and whether they would all stay till supper. Then the bell rang again louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service," one after another. Dory, Nori, Ori, Owen, and Glowin were their names, and very soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands tucked in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, some for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cake, so the hobbit was kept busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set near the hearth, and the seed cakes were all gone. The dwarfs were starting on a round of buttered scones when there came a loud knock. Not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage very angry and altogether bewildered and beweathered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled the door open with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarfs, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark he had carefully put there the morning before. "Carefully, carefully," he said. "It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat and then open the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Bilfer, Boffer, Bomber, and especially Thorin." "At your service," said Bilfer, Boffer, and Bomber, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. The last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, and in fact no other greater, the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased by falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Bilfer, Bofer, and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very naughty and said nothing about service. But poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray, don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now we are all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there's something left for the latecomers to eat and drink." "What's that? Tea?" "No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said Bulfer. "And mince pies and cheese," said Bulfer. "And a pork pie salad," said Bomber. "And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarfs through the door. "Put on a few eggs. There's a good fellow." Gandalf called him, and as the hobbits dumped off into the pantries, "And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles." "Seems to know much about the inside of my larders as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. "Confiscate and bebother these dwarfs," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dolan at the door of the kitchen, and Feely and Keely right behind them. And before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party, with the 13 dwarfs all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the free side nibbling at a biscuit, and trying to look as this was all perfectly ordinary and not the least bit of adventure. The dwarfs ate and talked, and time got on. At last they all pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you will all stay to supper," he said in his politest, unpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin, "and after we shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now clear up!" Thereupon the 12 dwarfs, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made all tall piles of the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on top. With one hand, while the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. "Please be careful!" "Please don't trouble, I can manage," but the dwarfs only started to sing. Thank you.